that nobody is an expert at how to do this during a pandemic. We're all learning. So I have some materials to share, some ideas to share, and really want to encourage you to be contributing into that chat box. We can add it into the materials. It might be some fodder for conversation as you're going through your learning experience here. So what have you learned about this? What are your big looming questions? What are your ideas? So please contribute into the chat box so it can be part of our shared learning. I'm going to ask you as welcome to actually, since there are only 3 of us right now, let's just do this verbally. I'm kind of interested in who's joining us. And if you have, what's your role specifically? Are you staff? Are you on the board? Are you an officer on the board? And I'm curious about where you are in the continuum of your board. Are you the founding board? Do you have a committee structure? And do you have specifically a finance committee or a treasurer? So there'll be 3 pieces of super helpful information for everyone.
Would you like me to start?
Why don't you? Yes, thank you.
Sure. My name's Nella Cumming. I'm the executive director at Encompass. We're a organization that serves young children and their families in North Bend through a variety of early learning and developmental therapy. My board chair is also on, so he'll introduce himself, so that's great. Our organization is 53 years old, and so our board is pretty well established. We have a committee structure, and we have finance committee, we have a governance committee, we have an executive committee, we have a fund development committee. I would say we're pretty close to a governance board at this point, pretty far along on that continuum. Be interested to hear how Tavish characterizes it, but we're pretty well-established nonprofit with a solid board structure.
Great.
So I'm Tavish McLean. Nice to meet you all. Incoming board president for Encompass. And yeah, it has appeared very well established to me, although this has been one of my first experiences on a nonprofit. I was on a school board before, and so being one of 5 is a little different than being one of 20. And understanding how the roles and responsibilities, the similarities, but also some of the challenges there. And I understand the importance of committees under that structure. And as Nella mentioned, we've got 3 big ones, but definitely a treasurer and a finance committee, which has been helpful.
Great, super. And we have one, I lost your little name tag. If can I hear from our 3rd participant?
This is David Yeworth.
Hi, David.
And I am the chair of Historic Seattle, and I'm also a capacity building consultant, and I also sit on the finance committee for Historic Seattle. And we are a pretty well-established organization that owns 6 properties, and a lot of our clients are nonprofit organizations that are tenants of the properties. So we also have a lot of concern about what their needs are.
Great. Okay. Super. Doug, let's move on to the next slide today. Okay. Next slide, Doug.
Catherine, I don't know if you can see, but there's several other participants. A couple more have joined.
I did not see. Yeah, let's hear from whoever just joined. And just really quickly, those name, role, and just quickly the status of your board right now.
Okay, I'm Kristen Saray from the Trail Youth out in North Bend, and we're like a 2-year-old fully established organization. The status of our board is we're growing, but we're trying to figure out board roles and what we're supposed to do.
Yep. Okay. Heidi?
Hi there. I'm Heidi Wallace. I am the new chair for Green Plain Northwest. We are a nonprofit in Maple Valley. We've been around for 7 years, and we pretty much had a full change of the board in December, and I took over unexpectedly. And with everything that's happening, I'm still trying to get my bearings. So.
Great. All right, and Lisa.
Hi, I'm sorry I was late. I was trying to join by phone, but got to find my computer. So are we just doing this chat box?
Yeah, just really quickly, just like yourself,
Okay.
and particularly your role in the general status of your board right now.
Okay, I'm Lisa Greenwald. I'm the CEO at Kindering. We're a nonprofit neurodevelopmental center. And our board, we have maybe about 21 people, pretty good solid board. We have do you want the committee structure? We've got committees, finance committee and an investment committee and a number of other committees.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's great. Great.
Okay.
Thank you for the pulse check on that and sort of the range of understanding the range of kinds of boards we have joining us. And there may be areas where I'll highlight some things where you already have a really strong committee structure for, and that's great. Some of what I'm going to be touching on, is maybe a little more relevant for those founding boards stepping into their governance role. So just keep that in mind, because you may have the infrastructure that's addressing a lot of these things. Doug, maybe next slide now. So just after today, I just want to highlight think of today, what we're going to do today is more lunch buffet than to-do list. So I'll be kind of highlighting a number of things, but they are not all your work. Your work is to figure out what your work is. And so this is that pass by the lunch buffet, kind of figuring out what you want to eat and what will fit on your very small plate, not that you have to eat everything, which would be overwhelming, right? And I want to really emphasize, and it's great that David's on the call as well, that because this is more of a overview and a walk by, every one of the topics we'll touch on today, you can go much deeper on. And if it's feeling overwhelming, we have a whole team of 3 capacity builders out there that can go deep in any number of these topics to support your work in here. And so thank you to the county for that. Doug, next slide. I want to really emphasize, as we start to jump into the what is the work, really want to emphasize the partnership here between the chair and the ED. Your partnership, your leadership together with lots of communication is really about setting up the conditions of success to maximize the board that you have right now to do your work. And I want to, as a reminder, your board really acts in 2 different ways. You've got your fiduciary duties. And if your board is still working on that, we're not going to be going into fiduciary duties today, but do that foundational work for sure. But that is when your board is basically acting as a group in that governance role. And there's a number of things that you are required to be paying attention to and leading on. And they often show up in things like your action items or the processes that you build in. You as individual board members also make very unique contributions based on your skills, your relationships, and you do that under the leadership and in the partnership with the executive director. And you also want to maximize those roles. So we'll be touching on both of those, starting with some of your big governance roles and then moving into how you can contribute. And right now during a crisis, I think both of those areas, you can really, I think organizations probably need your muscle there. Doug, let's check and look at the next slide. Okay, and in super broad buckets, and this was true before COVID-19, your board is probably working in these 4 areas: establishing identity and direction, you've got oversight functions, you've got a bunch of things you do around ensuring necessary resources. That includes dollars, but it also includes skills, right, and reputation. And then the board is responsible for setting the board up to do its work well. And we're going to be, the rest of today's conversation is going to be focusing in those 4 areas. And so I think we are ready to start diving in. Doug? I want to, right before we jump into those 4 specific content areas, there are 3 really important undercurrents that if you take nothing else away, keep these 3 things in mind, because they create dynamics everywhere, right? Executive directors are always really busy. Those are big, busy jobs. they are probably, your executive director is probably even more busy right now. And so the board has responsibilities for sure, but it is not to be creating more work that's not sort of mission critical. Really think about how you're contributing in a way that is not randomizing or crazy making for the executive director. Magical thinking is a real undercurrent. Know who your magical thinkers are. They are very often the executive director. This is why you perhaps hired this executive director, or why this organization exists, because here is someone who's passionate and visionary and aspirational. And then those are amazing traits. And magical thinking can be very, very dangerous in a time of crisis. You've got hard decisions to make. And if you just need to know who your magical thinkers are, and to be working, not to squash that, but to be working within that, to look at some of the realistic and very difficult things that you may have to be facing right now. And to keep in mind that those are very emotionally charged decisions. And so we are humans. It is very, we all have dynamics around emotionally difficult decisions. It is way more fun to be building an organization, to be hiring your staff, to be finding your first office, than it is to be discussing which of those programs we let go now, or whatever difficult thing that is happening right now. These are tight relationships, and you've hard earned and worked very hard to get there. So sometimes you don't want to look at those. And one of the things I want to emphasize is you need to be looking at those now. This is not business as usual. So let's take a look at some of the things you want to be looking at. Doug. All right, this one should feel super familiar, right? Boards are, you establish identity and direction. You've been doing this, whether you're a founding board or been there a million years, this should feel super common as your key responsibility. This is one of your big jobs. What is different now, and today is really about what might be different, or how might you want to move that lens specific to what we're experiencing under COVID-19 and beyond. One thing I just want to float to the top is you may have new opportunities coming your way, which is all great. You may have new populations coming to your door. That your programs, Best Starts, for example, you're all here because you're Best Starts awardees. You might be changing the kind of work you do. And this is all great. I'm not saying you shouldn't be doing this, but as a board responsibility, you need to be looking at that from your responsibility as setting direction and focus on mission. So are you staying mission aligned? Is this work, are these new opportunities, if you're changing population, for example, are you changing your mission? Maybe you can do it, but are you doing it at a cost to your core mission? And even if you can do it and all of those things, the answer is no, we're good, we're good, we're good. Are you the right ones to be doing it? I want to go back to executive directors are really, really busy. They cannot be tracking and knowing and paying attention to everything that's going on. So an example there might be, there are resources coming out for, emergency dollars, for food and rent assistance and all of that. And, maybe you're running a youth mentorship program, and that seems like, oh yeah, we can manage this as well. Which maybe you can, or maybe they're mental health dollars, and that might be the right thing for you to do for you and your families. Or, you might want to partner with the organization down the street that does this as part of their book of business. And so, and in this overwhelm of information, it's really easy to kind of miss the partnership opportunities that might actually be a better fit. So just be asking those questions, looking at that as you sort of take on some of these changes, which are genuine opportunities. And as you do this, you're all in this because of your real commitment to equity. You are probably somewhere along that continuum of both as a board and as a staff, how you make those decisions in crisis. I want to really urge you to keep that equity focus in front and center as you make some of the difficult decisions, whether that is to do with how you think about potential staff furloughs or other impacts on staff if you need to, or how changes in your programs, who's it affecting the most, right? So keep that central, because in the busyness that goes on, that's a very easy one to fall by the wayside. Doug? Thanks. The other areas to be thinking about, if you identity and direction, it is not a fiduciary duty to be creative, right? But you know, all boards offer in that generative thinking. And speaking, you know, to some of those founding boards or those newer boards, you're probably really, really close to the community. This is one of the biggest assets that you have always been able to provide to your organization and should continue to provide right now, is to be having conversations. This is not business as usual. We are not coming back to what was before. And your agendas and your conversations need to be reflecting that. So what does really engaging in what might that new normal be, and how does your organization deliver on that? And as you get more sophisticated in those conversations, you can start scenario planning. One of the real obvious ones that pops up is you might want to be talking about, what does school reopening look like, right? What does that mean for you community? Like, since nobody knows, but there are a lot of different options, and you can start positioning yourself to be responsive to that right now. You might want to consider developing a strategy screen, which gives you priorities, ways to think about that you've agreed upon, making really fast decisions, because things are happening very quickly. So if you have some parameters on a go or no go, that would be it might be very helpful for how the organization, the board, or the executive director and his or her team makes those decisions. So use your creativity in there as a contribution, and do be having those conversations. Done. Okay, so that stuff hopefully feels really familiar. It's definitely pretty fun. That next set of board responsibilities, as we get into your oversight functions, that's where, of course, this stuff always exists. The board is responsible for the financial health of the agency, and they really take on a very heightened level of attention right now from boards. And this is where it might be, you know, if you're evolving or you don't have a finance committee, there might be some extra consideration or work you want to do in that. If you do have a finance committee, and several of you do, I would really encourage you to be doing this work right, you know, with your finance committee, with your team, your finance team. And one of them is really thinking about cash flow analysis and planning for that. Your job is to understand the economics of the agency. That is the role of the board, right? And to be thinking in this scenario about the good, bad, and catastrophic. And I say catastrophic intentionally. And you may be in great shape, and this does not apply to everybody. And I really want to encourage you to be looking at your cash flow over whatever period of time is relevant to you. It might be month by month. Things might be changing several months down the line. But there are decisions, you're looking at your cash flow, there are decisions that get made based on the assumptions and timing. And that's one of those, the magical thinking asset and weakness can really come to hurt you, because you need to make some of those, you may need to make decisions sooner, and it's really, really easy to push those off and to not get to that work. And that makes things a lot harder on the back end. You know, with small agencies, you know, Best Arts has been really flexible and great. You may have other funding streams that are a lot weaker, and you may have, what it might do is undercut your entire infrastructure or administrative backbone, or, you know, any number of things that really affect even your stronger funding. You know, you feel real strong about delivery here, but it's getting undercut because other funding is not as solid. So you got to make those decisions early. Know what they are, keep an eye on them, and make those decisions as early as you can. Done. Okay, a few other things I want to just highlight. Again, these are not relevant to everybody, but they might be. From a board responsibility, several of you, I don't know if you specifically, but several Best Arts awardees applied for example, payroll protection plan, PPP. There's other federal money that you might be getting. The board has a responsibility to understand those terms. For example, I've had a couple different conversations where I've heard executive directors refer to PPP as a grant. And it's actually a loan. It's a potentially forgivable loan, but you need to meet certain requirements. And so from a board perspective, you've just taken on a loan, and you are obviously hopefully striving to get that forgiven, but you need to know the terms of that. And so your big risk, for example, and with PPP might be basically like double counting on some things. And so know what the terms of those, whatever assistance is already out there or might be coming out, pay attention to them, and make sure from a fiscal oversight perspective, the board is not, the organization is not taking on an obligation that you hadn't planned for. You don't want to find out in 8 weeks when the bill comes due on PPP, you now owe $70,000 because something got missed in there. So that is an oversight responsibility for the board. I also would encourage you to be looking at the impacts of remote work. You're all working, we're all coming from home, and all of your processes are now being done remotely. This may be a real quick look, it may be a deeper look for you depending on your situation, but you may have some processes that are built on the assumption of work being done in person, and they may be changing. So know what your fiscal controls are and how that might need to change because of remote work. And also take a look at your bylaws. You may have some language in your bylaws about being in person. You may have some things that are being affected around quorums right now because board members are, less present because of their own childcare issues, their own health issues. So just be aware of what might need to get a little more attention or possibly change. Again, under your fiduciary responsibility as a board. So think about some of those. One more thing on oversight, and we'll take a little pause. Done. The last one I'll just point out, yes, be planning for a decrease in government funding. I think we've all seen enough and heard enough that the COVID response is having a tremendous impact. We are all very reliant on government funding, and so be planning for it. It gets a little bit into the cash flow analysis, but this is in your responsibility to have a fundraising plan. That should be part of it for sure. The other thing at the top, just to highlight, the board has a responsibility in that area of risk. And right now, probably what you want to be thinking about, your executive team, your executive director, you're, I'm sure, having conversations about when and how to reopen, right? And so from a board perspective, be thinking of, your thing is around risk, to be participating in those conversations really around any of your legal liabilities there and health and safety. And so kind of be thinking about those from a board perspective. So I've just sort of quickly gone through 2 of the 4 areas we highlighted at the beginning around the big buckets that boards work in. And had meant to ask you to sort of just be throwing in ideas in the chat box as we went along, but I want to take a little pause right now and just for 2 reasons. One is, how many are on? I'm not looking at the whole screen. How many of us are there right now? 3, 4. Yeah, let's do this sort of together. Curious as I went through these 4 areas really quickly, the lunch buffet, is there anything that you're paying attention to? This is our opportunity for peer learning is big here. That in those 4 areas around direction and it's 2 areas, direction and leadership, and then oversight. I'm going to get to the next 2 around how the board works and your ensuring resources next. But in those 2 areas, anything that you're paying attention to that you want to help other boards learn about, I'm going to ask that question right there. Just kind of throw that out for just a minute, and then I'm going to ask you to another question. What have I missed in those 2 areas that you think you want to share with some of your peers?
I think it's hard to identify like best rules of thumb. Your points are good here, the bullets, but the question is like how much padding to leave in next year's budget.
Yeah.
Because of the potential decreases in government funding. I mean, the trillions of dollars that have been put into the economy and how that's going to leave our coffers. But then, if we got into a recession, depression, and fundraising is also an issue.
Yeah.
We want to build a responsible operational plan that doesn't over rely on these sources. But also being mindful that we're a nonprofit and we can't just sit around on, you know, tons of money. So trying to be responsible stewards.
Mm-hmm.
Don't want to cut programs just because we're afraid of what may come.
Yeah, and I think, thank you. I think you make a really good point. I don't mean to be like shrill, and I'm not giving you that impression at all. I want to emphasize that I think you're saying the same thing, is you need to be looking at that. You know, for some organizations, this could be an issue of survival past COVID, and for others, it is, you know, maybe working around the edges and figuring out some other more strategic ways to do this. And that is where your work together, you've got to figure out where your big risk areas are. And I think you're making a very good point. Like, that is also not being afraid. It's that you have to figure out as a board, as an ED and a chair, like, what is your balance between understanding the financial risks, mitigating them appropriately, and then making, perhaps, you know, being overly optimistic in that. And thank you, David added some point in, like, how do organizations get more comfortable or more understanding of what does it mean to take on debt if you get to that place? So that might be some conversations for you to be having in your finance committee, and some learning in that area as well. Anything else that you want to throw out that would be helpful to share with other boards out there?
Catherine, can I add on to that?
Yeah, please.
Part of it too is that I feel like with the PPP, as well as other potential lending opportunities, the organization is asked to take on a different mission, which might be to protect jobs for people, which is different than the mission. And so, you know, most of our budget is staff, and if we don't have the resources coming in, it's hard to lay off staff when you know that we're going into a recession. But by the same token, if we take in on debt to then pay the staff, we don't have a plan to pay it back, we're in a really uncomfortable spot.
Exactly. And those are the conversations you should be having at the board level. I mean, ideally, like when you're, like, even before taking on, for example, PPP, those are board level hard conversations. And thank you for pointing out that is actually a mission area. I hadn't really thought about it like that, around keeping staff employed. Like, is that the mission of the organization? I want to ask, when you think about your board, oh, Lisa, I'm sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say to David, that was really a helpful way to frame what I've been grappling with as well. And then I had a question, Catherine. You said doubling up. You said that's the biggest risk for the PPP. Can you expand on what you were trying to say there?
Yeah, and this is where you, like, really understanding the finances of how the organization works. So if you have, because as David just pointed on the same thing, the purpose of PPP is really payroll, right? So you got this money based on it's 2.5 times your monthly payroll, right? So that's what you got, and that is what it's supposed to go for. So it's a double dipping issue potentially. So you're using that money for payroll. If you have cost reimbursable grants and you're keeping staff on, you know, or other, you know, however your funding is working, if you're using a grant to pay, say for me, and now you're using PPP dollars to pay for me, you are now basically double dipping. You can't do that. So there's a risk that you may get to the end of that 8 weeks and not have enough qualified expenses to get the loan forgiven. So, you know, this is not a nice way to, like, you know, pad for some savings. It needs to be used for those purposes in that time, which means you can't be using other dollars for those purposes in this time. And so it might get to a lot of back end things. That's from a board perspective, know that. And then from a staff finance perspective, maybe talk to your funders. And there's a lot of information on PPP, but just be aware that there's a double counting potential issue there. There might be solutions and how you negotiate with funders, and what you know, maybe you know, ask, you know, maybe we can bill you for stuff later. Just don't be double counting right now, because then you're going to be stuck with a loan that was supposed to be a grant. And then that's where it gets to what David was talking about, like, oh, now we have debt. Like, this didn't help, right? That actually just potentially made the situation worse. Okay, and let me ask, just are there things that when you think about your board right now, just in these two big areas, is there anything you're not? Do you feel like you should be talking about that you're not? You feel like you're having the right conversations? Great, that's great. Okay. All right, let's move to the next two board responsibility areas, just to touch on right now. Doug, okay, great. All right, ensuring necessary resources. Not going to, I think somebody already mentioned that having, and we've certainly touched on that, having a plan, the board should have a plan for how it raises, how it's actually meeting its revenue needs. And so you need to be keeping an eye on that and adjusting that. I want to switch a little bit right now to how individual board members can be helping. And it really sort of goes back to executive directors are really, really busy. And so a few things I just want to point out is just ideas, but it might help you as board members, individual board members, and as a chair, help to identify how your team there on the board can make helpful contributions given how busy and how changing these environments are. And one of them does get to fundraising, but not as a board responsibility, as an individual role. For example, we all know that events are changing. Everyone's gone virtual. So maybe your event you're talking about that for what you're doing in the fall or maybe the spring. You can really put your board to work. I've had some conversations with executive directors, particularly if you don't have a development staff or really thin development staff, figuring out the best way to do a virtual event. Nobody has expertise. We have more expertise now than we did in March, but like no one's a pro at this. We don't have years and years and years of experience to lean back on. Formats are changing, and the best way to do that to meet your revenue needs is evolving. And so you could put your board members to task on this. And again, if you're a more evolved board and you have you've got a development committee, you might be doing this already. For boards that don't have that, it may be a way to think about it. You can have your board members popping into other people's events and saying, hey, I really like this. This seems to work for us. This one didn't. Your board members can be bringing in kind of who they think of as potential donors and field testing some of the ideas you might have around, whatever it is you're thinking about doing for your event, because you really want to be maximizing that shorter opportunity in a field where people are getting a little worn out by virtual events, and they're very, very different than getting people in the room together. Think about, particularly if you're a younger board, you're probably not set up as a fundraising board, and that's fine. There's this idea that, we all have to be big fundraisers and giving $10,000 a year, and that's your role is to bring resources in, and that means a whole lot of things. One thing that might really help the organization right now is showing that 100% contributions. That helps in a lot of conversations that your executive director might be having with foundations and with other possible funders. It shows a level of commitment, and that could be $5. It doesn't have, so it doesn't have to be a big number, but really think about, and the chair can be thinking about this, is are you meeting 100% contribution level? And if not, have a conversation with your board about that. Why it's so important. One of the real positives that's coming out of this experience is new people are getting interest in organizations. If you're filling a table or two, you have 10 people sitting at your breakfast. What's happening right now is, your network is expanding to other networks, which are expanding to other networks, often through social media and other contacts. And so really using your board to expand beyond their usual people to try to get to those networks, because your fan base may have really increased right now, which is great. And they may be donors. They might be really passionate about what you're doing and really your board may not be thinking about this. And so to really have those conversations about how to be doing that and practicing those practicing how to do that. And to also think about, well, in kind, in general, but think about your other community, the faith-based organizations and neighborhood groups, businesses, both in a conversation about what do they need. You may be in a position that this is a very synergistic relationship right now and some new opportunities. They may also have resources that can be helpful for you and your families and your kids. So as board members, you can be having those conversations. Now, I want to really emphasize with this and with everything we're talking about in the next little bit, this is not running rogue. This is it's really under the direction and what does the executive director need you to be doing right now? It's not helpful for a board saying, to come to your executive, to come back to your board. One board member has a great conversation with their church and says, hey, I think I want you to meet with the pastor because blah, 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 blah. Like, probably not helpful, really. It's really you need to know what the executive director needs and how he or she wants to be getting information and interacting. Otherwise, it's more crazy, right? So do this under the direction of what the organization needs. Doug. Okay. Some of this might be more appropriate for smaller organizations, but think about it. There are new opportunities. There is information overload right now. So yes, we've got funding that's being cut, but we also know, local funders have really stepped up. They have stepped up also on really short timelines. Seattle Foundation has, has put out some more money right now, and they've, some of it's due on Friday. So that quickness to respond and know what's going on and where the opportunities are for you is often too much for an executive director to track on every level. Things may be happening at the state level, things may be happening at schools or school districts, and certainly at the federal level. It may be, again, for smaller organizations, particularly that don't have a deeper bench, helping with some of that research. Helping just vet the volume of information that is coming at executive directors right now. It is huge, and it's really hard to make meaning of. And so you might just be that. It might be a really helpful role to be that funnel of. I've been looking at this, and these are 3 really good opportunities for us to track. Or I would say the same of resource lists right now. There are 8 zillion resource lists coming out all the time. It's overwhelming. So maybe you can help because your community, what's going to be most helpful for them, and say these are 2 that we really want to double down on. You always play the role as ambassadors, and your executive director might want you to step into that role a little bit more right now with funders or policymakers or businesses. So really being willing to have and able and skilled at having those conversations and as a representative of that agency there might be more that you can be helpful in there. So again, this is following the executive director's lead in that area. I think I might have one more thing I want to say about that. No, I think that's all I'm going to say on that particular topic. Any adds into that area just on how you might be able to help? And I was really thinking about smaller organizations in particular, and certainly bigger organizations with more developed committee structures have some good mechanisms for that work. Anything else to share in there? Throw it in the chat box. Oh, yeah.
Oh, I was.
Go ahead. Yep. Go ahead. Sorry.
Well, I was just going to say, I think this is a great list no matter what size organization. And I think for me as an ED, one of the challenges is I have a new board chair every year. And, you have to redevelop that relationship and how you work together. And so these things are all necessary. I don't know if other people have turnover like that, but for us, it's a 1-year term. And, each one is very different.
Yeah, that is a short term from what I've seen for sure, and certainly a challenge on you. Something you may want to consider sort of changing at some point, but that might be a different topic of conversation. And I think you're hitting on something that is, as boards are thinking about their work right now, that relationship building, you know, if you're bringing in, you always want to be intentional, of course, in bringing in new members, that cultivation, you're sort of marrying somebody for 2 to 3 years, maybe longer, depending if they're renewing their terms. And so it's a real balance right now. Some boards are on an arc of trying to build their boards as they're moving from a founding board. And those, and they're really working with their chair. I'm seeing that a lot of like getting the chair up to speed on what the roles are, getting the board up to speed. You might be in a place where there's enough brain space to continue that, or some of it might need to be a little more paused. At least the recruitment might need to be paused right now. So I think that's worth thinking about. And I think you're in a constant turnover is certainly a challenge, because with a lot of organizations, it takes 6 months to even understand what the organization does, let alone the complexity of your finances, right? So that's a difficult one. And if there are any, you know, particularly chairs, any of you, if you can offer some ideas or suggestions on how to make that annual transition a little easier, might be some helpful tips out there.
No, we have an executive committee that's made up of the chair, the outgoing chair, so they're both on it, so there's overlap, and then the secretary, treasurer, and whoever I mess, the vice chair. And they're really my group. And it's that, I think we've also been meeting more regularly during this time, and they all represent, you know, different areas of the organization, and they're all have been with us a really long time and have that history. And then there's a lot of other new board members, but yeah, I think that yearly transition would be really hard. I just went through a transition and they were both really great, but totally different. And so it's nice to have them both still there in my like inner circle group. So that overlap has been really helpful.
Great. I want to throw things in the chat as you think about it. Anything we've just talked about, or specifically to that question. I want to move to, in addition to everything else that the chair does, how the board, you know, how the chair can be thinking about your work right now with the executive director specifically. And one thing I want to really emphasize is, yeah, obviously talked a little bit there about some of the accountability, yeah, that is some of the accountability things, or, you know, and the oversight roles. And I want to emphasize that you're an accountability partner, not a hammer, right? So it would not be helpful if you're kind of that chair coming in and saying, well, show me you're this and you're that, and let's build a this and a that, and your process. And like, really, you're the partner in that right now. Is the executive director, going back to, is super, super busy, right? And so really, I'm not saying that there shouldn't be kind of things that the board needs to see that the executive director and the team can be supplying, but really be doing that in partnership, not on a, now's the time to really kind of ratchet down. Really make no assumptions. If I just went through a laundry list of things you might be doing. I really need to emphasize that those are just ideas. They might be super helpful, they might not be super helpful, and don't make the assumption that it is. That's where you randomize the executive director and her team, right? Ask, would it be, if you think it is, like, ask if it would be helpful, and then really listen to what the executive director needs and how the executive director needs to work right now. You got to play on that. She's really, really busy. One thing that I'm pretty sure she needs is frequent communication. You both need frequent communication to know what's going on. Things are changing very, very rapidly. And this is that opportunity for thought partnership. Nobody can think of it all right now. And so that strategic thought partnership, the opportunity thought partnership, is a really helpful one, because it's, you know what it's like, right? In crisis mode, you're running around stamping out brush fires. Responsiveness, things are changing really fast. And I think both for the board chair and the board in general, like, sometimes the executive director might need something right away. If you're putting out something like, things are just moving too fast. For example, this Seattle Foundation, put out money and it's due on Friday. And if you need board approval to apply for that, and the executive director is now herding cats, not helpful. And so be very conscious of response time, particularly with the other board members. And as a board chair, think of your role as you're not the herder of cats per se. It's that those might be conversations to find out, like, why, if somebody is constantly late on responding and it's holding up processes, have some conversations. And again, we're in a very human environment right now. It might be that have a board person that's just childcare and work and sick and all those human things to be compassionate about, which we get. And really it's kind of emphasizing that need on responsiveness. And if it's honestly, we all know that there are board members that haven't been responsive for a really, really long time. And so, maybe that is not this might be a time to kind of understand the board. All of the good and the bad of your board is going to come out in high relief right now. So pay attention to that. Maybe time to, if you have a really inactive board member and now that is holding you up, it may be some time to, just kind of clean up maybe your roster. You might want to be as a board chair, the director of traffic. Now, you may or may not need to do that, and you only do this if it's helpful for the executive director. The ED might love getting 15 emails a week from the board, right? And I got this idea, and he or she might love that, or might not. It will probably get lost in a set of emails. And so you as the chair can play that, know what the board needs to know about and how you're using the board to do that. And maybe you're the vetter of that information. Maybe it's one consolidated communication and not 45 in the course of a week. So find out what your ED needs to be that single point of contact. The board plays a really, really important role in morale right now. These are hard times, hard decisions. Everyone's under a lot of both personal and professional stress. And so the board can play a really important role as that cheerleader, for the executive director. And sometimes, particularly small organizations where you may know the staff, like showing the love to the staff can go a long way. So play that role, and really think about your role with executive director in structuring the work of the board itself, which I'm going to talk a little bit about in the next bit of conversation. Just want to ask the executive directors, is there anything else when you think about how you work with your chair that you want chairs, across King County to know what would be helpful for you?
I guess as ED, just check-ins, of how we're doing. Sometimes I feel like as ED, I gotta be this certain persona, always up here, leading, positive, so just having a private conversation with the chair one-on-one and feeling like I can be transparent and say, okay, I'm really overwhelmed or I'm feeling really frustrated. But that's not a move that I will make on my own. I'm not going to reach out and say, I need to vent. So I guess just having somebody, the chair, to reach out and say, okay, I'm giving you that permission to not always have to be up here, just privately one-on-one. Mm-hmm. How can we assist? How are you feeling? That way.
Yep. Thank you.
Yeah, we've set up a standing meeting with our board chair, the ED and board chair. I've done that. Sometimes it's every other week, sometimes it's once a month. It really just depends, but that's been really helpful because then it's set, we have the time, and neither of us have to remember to reach out. And usually it's at a coffee shop or something like that. Of course, not now, but yeah. I would encourage, if you can get that kind of set up, that it's been really helpful to me. When I started as an ED, I was a first-time ED, and the board chair at the time set it up weekly, and then gradually, it's kind of gone down, but it's been very helpful.
Yeah. I love that in the honest conversations, like you have big roles, right? And it's really important for chairs to recognize that you're humans too, and this is hard. And I love that ear. Sometimes you just need an ear, right? And that does not mean, and I want to, that being the ear does not mean saying, I think you should do fill in the blank, right? Sometimes it's just being an ear, and sometimes it's being a thought partnership, but it's not usually saying you should do this. So to hold that human role with your team. Yeah, great. And I want to just move on to, okay, that's how you're working together, and the two of you together then set up the board to be at its most effective, right? So some ideas on that. Douglas, let's move on to the next to last. Yeah. So think about how the board operates itself. And clearly you're not operating the way we did a few months ago because you're not meeting in person. If your agendas look exactly the same as they did 3 months ago, you might want to look at that. And maybe that's fine. Again, it might be fine, but this is about focusing on what is the most important. There's a lot of work that can be done. Your volunteer board, what do you need to be doing right now to respond to the immediate crisis and to prepare the organization for who it is when you come out, we all come out of crisis. And maybe some things can wait or not. It might be that you were in the process of working on your board manual and now everyone seems to have a little more time and it's a great time to be doing that, or this is not the time to be doing that. So really get with your executive director, get clear on what those 1, 2, 3 at most really top priorities are, and focus your time, the board's time, on that. And think about your meeting schedule to match the pace of change. If you stuck with your schedule of monthly 3-hour meetings, a monthly 3-hour meeting on Zoom, everyone's going to poke their eyes out, right? And it may not be frequent enough to be able to respond to everything that's going on right now. So figure out what the right cadence is. And you might want to make them just shorter, really focused agendas. And moving to that virtual meeting it's a set of skills unto itself to be intentional about. Because they're weird, they're mixed, right? And you should be, as a board chair, having some of those individual conversations and connection points with your board members in between meetings. That is part of your role. You want to keep that up right now. Be super intentional about your agendas, and you may want to be going deeper rather than wider right now. You might want to, absolutely, yes. I will respond to Lisa's email right now since I happen to see it. Yeah, the PowerPoint will be available on the Best Starts through the blog or the YouTube page. So we'll get you when we can get that to you. You might want to think about, depending how what your board does is, like if you spend a lot of time doing reports, there's a lot of really important stuff to be talking about at very deep levels. And so consider doing a consent agenda, putting everything in writing, and can play with what works structurally. Try something, see if it's working, change it. But consider consent agendas so you're not spending your precious limited time hearing reports, but really like understanding issues and charting the direction you need to go in right now. Virtual meetings have their own dynamics. And so as a chair, as an ED, you might want to think about creating your norms in that and the roles you might want to have that hold these effectively. One of them you might want to consider is that in meeting time, video's on. It's really hard to read a room. If you're trying to keep everyone engaged and moving in the same direction, but it's no one's video's on, it's really hard to know like what's going on. So that may or may not be a norm you want to think about. And with some boards, just be conscious that your board members may not have the technology or the skills to know how to be doing this. And if it's someone this is their only Zoom meeting a week, they're not on it 8 hours a day, there's a skill set here. So make sure that your board can come prepared with the information and the skill set to work effectively in this environment. I think I've got one more thing on board operations. 2 more things on board operations. Douglas. I think I've hinted at this, maximize the skills you have. And this is both if you have committees and not, but you might not have the skill set in a smaller board to do some of those scenario planning that we talked about, or do the cost analysis. So maybe you want to create an ad hoc team, bring in some volunteers. That means not, you know, you're not committing them to be on your board forever, but they can certainly be helpful for you right now. If you've got a super relationship person and you need networking, task that person to do that. Task your detailed person to be doing some of that detailed work. But as a chair, know your skill set, know what the organization needs, and deploy your skill set to do that in a way that may be different than what you were doing before. So be super intentional about just maximizing what you have. It may or may not be a time for board learning, right? There may be some more flexibility in their schedule. There may not. We're asking them to do a bunch of different things right now, and maybe there's some stuff that they can be learning on their own. You're thinking about that. Really do want to, thank you, emphasize the capacity builders can help in anything that we've talked about right now. So either go through the capacity builder you're working with who can access the entire team, go through, yes, of course. We're going to end in 1 minute. Or use go through your program officer at the county to access the skill sets that can support any of the work we're talking about right now. I'm going to sort of end us. The last thing I just wanted to say, one more, is just as a board member, you're always an ambassador for sure, and you're speaking from your heart. One more, Douglas. You are also right now. You need to speak as one voice. And so I think the chair and the executive director may want to take some intentional time as to know what those talking points are. So you don't have 3 different board members saying 3 different things about what's going on in the agency right now. I think I'm going to end right there if anyone, because we're at 11 o'clock and that is pretty much what I wanted to cover. We will share the slides. Really want to encourage you. There are more Best Starts, a couple more, Douglas, just some more Best Starts webinars that will go deeper in some of these topics. Use your capacity builder to go deeper in some of these topics. Use each other. If you've got some ideas right now you want to throw into the chat room that you think are helpful for your peers to be thinking about. And I think I'll stop talking. Thank you. Yes, this was being recorded. What we're going to do will be on the YouTube site. I think we're going to edit it in some way. We'll have to figure out how to do that. But yes, all of this will be available and for you and for others. And again, go to your capacity builder to go deep into any one of these topics, not just these topics, but anything we touched on today, or really anything that you're working on right now. Anything else anyone wants to add to close us out today? You all are doing really amazing hard work, and your boards are, volunteers are so committed, your executive director is working so hard. And so really, as you think about that leadership and that partnership together, knowing what each other needs, how to work best together, and to set up the whole board for success, that's what you can be working on right now. So it's all good work. So go forth, do great things for kids and families. And I look forward to connecting with you in some other way at some other time. Thank you all for the work you do out there.
Thank you.
Great. Bye.
All right, so I have to jump off, but I saved the chat, got everyone's emails. I can send out this and send out the information on the future.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I want to, I don't want to send it out with the notes, my little unedited notes.
Okay.
I just want the slides to go out.
Well.
Yeah, could you take that? Can you do that? You want me to do that?
I'll work it out. Okay.
And I'd love at some point, just like your feedback on that, how we could be more, I could be more effective in that, and just a lot of content I felt.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, like, I feel, yeah, just like took a little bit longer to get going just as people were signing on a little late.
Yeah.
Yeah, just probably, yeah, we didn't have a great sense of like how long it would take. Like, I know we wanted to have a little bit of time for questions.
Hmm.
And we didn't really get to, I guess we had some questions in the middle, which was nice.
Yeah.
Anytime you're like asking people for like interaction and discussion, it just, it, I don't know. I don't know how like to figure out how long that will take. So
Yeah.
that's kind of hard. But other than that, I thought like going over the content went really well and everything, and people really appreciated it.
Yeah. Okay. And then let's talk. Yeah, I know you have to hop off, but like, what does editing look like? Like, how, what we need to do next to get this out to the county. So,
Mm-hmm.
okay, we can talk later about that.
Yep, sounds good.
Cool. Thank you, Douglas.
Yeah, of course. See ya.
All right. Bye.